That's a thread. Oh, you look at this. You slept in your clothes. I mean, if you saw last night's show, John Cleese and I decided that we hadn't scratched the surface, and we just sat here and waited 24 hours. And, don't you get it, folks? Anyway, this is part 2 of an interview with John Cleese, best known to you perhaps as part of Monty Python's Flying Circus. And last night we talked a good bit about the film The Life of Brian, which seems to have something to offend everyone, although I think that might be, again, what we said last night, a false impression of it, that if people hadn't been told they were going to be offended, a lot fewer people would have been. I've only read it, but it reads so funny. Well, I can wait to see it. I was going to say I can't wait to see it. But we should examine some of these cliches.
Yes. I wouldn't want to give the impression, in fact, that many of the people who are going to the cinema seem to be offended by it. I mean, the heads of organisations certainly have been, and 150 people demonstrated last Sunday. But I actually went to see it last night. And 3 people did walk out, but it was after the opening credits.
You didn't like those somehow?
So I don't think that could have been offence, but otherwise everyone enjoyed it. We've had people watching the audiences sitting in there, seeing what's happening. And I think the offence is what a friend of mine who once ran a BBC department called public offence. And I had a talk with him on the plane over here about this whole thing, and he said when you really offend people, they tend to come up to you privately, and they express their offence really quite gently, but you really feel uncomfortable afterwards because you really do feel you've upset someone. He said there's also what they call institutional offence, which is, and he had a lot of this, as I say, running a department at the BBC, which is people complaining because they're the heads of organisations and they feel that their members will complain to them if they don't complain. Do you see what I mean?
Yes, I can see that they would go to a screening of it and think, well, now, if we don't say anything about this, we're liable to be criticised. So then they become offended officially. Yeah.
But it's so much to do with the type of mind, because, I mean, one of the, I hate to say messages, but one of the themes in the film is do make up your own mind about things and don't do what people tell you. And I find it slightly funny that there are now religious organisations saying, do not go and see this film that tells you not to do what you were told.
What percentage of the increase in the box office would you say you owe gratitude to these people who've been offended for?
Phenomenal.
They've done a wonderful...
They have actually made me rich.
Yes. Well, I hope they're satisfied.
Well, I feel we should send them something, like a crate of champagne or something. But there's no question. I mean, I think originally the movie might have gone into 200 movie houses. And once the protests started, it was soon decided to put it into 600.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah,
so it is wonderful when people embark on a course of action that they can really achieve something so totally counterproductive. You know, one can only think that either they're profoundly stupid, and these people are obviously not, but either that or they become so enraged that they are incapable of thinking. Because obviously, if you don't want people to see a movie, the thing to do is to just let it quietly die away, get a tiny little review on the movie page, and nobody knows about it. But if you do want to make a success of a movie, I've learned this trip, you want to get people cross and angry and protesting. It's extraordinary.
Now you'll have people thinking that maybe these protests have actually come from pythons in disguise who knew it would make the movie a success. And
it's been suggested.
That will offend people too.
Well, we had an idea for a premiere that I think they eventually cancelled, partly because Warner Brothers said to us, well, look, I'm afraid after all the protesting, you don't have to do 10 days publicity in New York, you only have to do 3 days. So that was really quite nice from our point of view. But we also did have a premiere arranged in which we were going to get the lady who looks just like the Queen, Jeanette Charles, I think it was going to come along. We have a figure from one of the Python shows called the pantomime Princess Margaret, who is a 9-foot reproduction of Princess Margaret. And we were going to have them arrive for a pantomime royal premiere at the movie house, and we were going to have cardboard cutouts of great stars like Paul Newman and Frank Sinatra standing in the lobby with us, and they were going to come in, and I think Warner Brothers at that point felt that having offended the majority of the religious groups that we shouldn't also go for the monarchists, so that was dropped. We suggested that, incidentally, as the premiere for the last movie in England. We suggested this, and guess what the guy did?
What?
He rang up Buckingham Palace to ask if it would be all right.
Which, in fact, ought to be a sketch on your show.
That's wonderful.
Oh, what, did he get anyone to reply?
They suggested it would not be all right.
What's the difference between suggesting it would not and saying it would not? That's a nice fine point there.
Well, they have this down to a T. I mean, the royal family really have a great deal of power in England, but it's exercised very, very gently. I mean, there is a story. I better be quite careful about this. There's a very well-known and very excellent English actor who was at a dinner on one occasion. And when a very senior and well-known royal person got up, not the Queen, to make a speech, he shouted such things as "take 'em off" and "sit down."
Show us your muscles.
He didn't work for about 6 years.
What did he actually have in mind in doing that?
Well, that I don't think we've ever gone.
Refreshing about people who do it. John, how much, certainly having studied law, as we say, or I believe you say read law,
that's right.
Must have stood you in wonderful stead, as we also say in comedy. What does the one have to do with the other? Anything at all?
Oh, dear, that's awful. I can't trot out one of my prepared answers to that. I think that it has always struck me that my strength and the strength of the guy that I write with on Python, Graham Chapman, has been that we have a very strong logic. And I think people often think when you're writing crazy sketches that it's just a question of being crazy. Whereas in fact what it is, you choose your crazy premises and then you must stick to that logic absolutely rigidly. So I suppose the kind of logical thinking that I got from studying law and before that from science, because Graham was also science-based, he was a doctor, I think that's always helped us to keep the logic in our pieces very tight. So one could say that. Also, of course, it gives you a considerable interest in words. I find myself looking up words the whole time. But that's the only real connection. I mean, once I had a chance not to be a lawyer, I
You leapt at it, did you?
Straight away.
What possessed you to think you wanted to be one in the first place, then, with this strong performing...
Well, you see, I came from the smallest of small-town folk, from Weston-super-Mare, on the west coast of England, just down the coast from Bristol.
You know, I thought Weston-super-Mare in your credits or your resume was a joke. There is such a name.
There really is such a name. There was a Roman encampment there 2,000 years ago, and super-mare is super mare, means on the sea, so some Latin influence still pertains. But anyway, the thing about that town was it was as tiny and small town as possible. Arts were completely non-existent, except perhaps from a few people who would go and put Beethoven records on, but that's as far as it would go. And I never had the slightest idea that I would come into the business at all, and I still find it's a bit of a surprise to be in it. And the only thing that I can attribute it to at all was my father did have a great sense of humour, and a great sense of cliché, and a very biting wit, which he hid under a rather pleasant, polite English exterior, because the English are vicious, you know, but if they're very polite with it, people often don't pick it up. And that's the only connection I can get. But I somehow got into it simply because I was offered $50 to $60 a week as a writer when I left university, as opposed to the $18 a week I would have got as a lawyer.
Can you politely turn people down at parties who say, oh, do the silly walk that you did as the minister of the Bureau of Silly Walks, or whatever the title is?
Yes.
I mean, if I were to get you to go up and do it now, would you be able to politely turn me down?
I think so, yes.
Yes.
That particular sketch is, you know, when you do something and it catches on and everybody likes it, and then for the next 8 years, as you creep out of your house at 8:30 in the morning, oi, do your funny walks then, John! It's just so painful.
Yeah. Of course. Remind us of how it looks here. No, you don't have to do it until later.